Good evening. This is Jim Conlan, and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Irish Formula One analyst who's graced our TV screens for many of years in RT covering Formula One, David Kennedy, an ex-Irish driver with so much prestige as well. And this topic this evening, we're delighted to have David Kennedy on to talk about the top 10 Formula One world champions from 1990 to 2020. So that's over a 30-year span, and this list, to be on this list and to be considered for this, you must have won a world championship. So there's many great drivers in the past 30 years, but sadly they haven't won a world championship, so they haven't been considered. There's over 13 different world champions, some of them with one championship, some of them varying to 7 world championships. So before I bring David Kennedy in to start with number 10 to get us rolling, I'm just going to call out the world championships order starting from 1990 to 2019. So in 1990, Ayrton Senna won the World Championship with McLaren. He followed that up in 1991, putting back-to-back World Championships together. In 1992, Nigel Mansell won it for Williams. And then in 1993, Alain Prost won it for Williams again. 1994-95, it was Michael Schumacher who gathered his first 2 World Championships for Benetton. In 1996, Damon Hill won his only world championship for Williams, and in 1997 Jacques Villeneuve repeated defeat with Williams. In 1998 and 1999 the Flying Finn Mika Hakkinen put 2 world championships together in McLaren, and then began a reign of 4 world championships on the trot from 5 world championships on the trot for Michael Schumacher for Ferrari. That brought us up to 2005, and again a two-peat was done by Fernando Alonso, putting 2 back-to-back world championships together in Renault. 2007 saw Kimi Raikkonen put a world championship, he's only won with Ferrari. 2008 began Lewis Hamilton's first world championship for McLaren. 2009 then Jenson Button won his only world championship for Brawn, and then Sebastian Vettel put 4 world championships together with Red Bull. In 2014, 2015, Lewis Hamilton put 2 more back-to-back world championships together in Mercedes. Nico Rosberg split that in 2016 winning his only world championship for Mercedes, and for the last 3 years Lewis Hamilton has won 3 on the trot. I suppose, David, before we get to your number 10 there, there's so many varying characteristics. There's so many guys with multiple world championships here. So they're going to obviously feature higher up on your list. So we're going to bring you to number 10. And who makes it? There's 13 guys. 3 have to miss out. Who makes it for you at number 10?
Thanks, Jim. Great to speak to you again. I suppose there's a couple of ways of measuring this, and people often look at who's the best Formula One driver or who's the quickest, and actually they're different. They're different drivers, and I would have a different list for fastest and best. But I've taken this to be the best Formula One drivers, and just as you wound your way to the list there, it elicited a lot of memories. And of course, I've raced against many of these incredible drivers, as often as not in junior categories, as we all made our way up the ladder. But the first one I would list at number 10, and it was a very difficult place to put a driver, these last, can I say, the 10 best in the world, because you're looking at a couple of drivers that there was only a shade of difference between them for this position in number 10. But I'd give that to Nigel Mansell. Basically, I'd see that he would trump Damon Hill, Jacques Villeneuve and Jenson Button, and these were the ones that we would drop out. Is that he just had that fire in his belly, and when the car wasn't ready to deliver the goods, he would, I would call it the Fred Flintstone effect. He would literally manhandle it around the course. So Nigel, I would put in at number 10.
I would just give you some of Nigel Mansell's stats. 31 wins, 480 career points, and 1 world championship. And I suppose Nigel winning it for 1992, he's won an only world championship. Was he a driver that probably should have put more world championships together, given his talent?
He was a slightly conflicted character, and You could say that he was well balanced because he had a chip on both shoulders, but I don't think he realized his full potential given his confrontational personality. I must say he wasn't terribly well liked. I always enjoyed his company. I raced against him in Formula Ford, and he had basically nothing, same as a lot of us when we started. No support, no family money, and just had to get by on the skin of his teeth. But one of the statistics that is quite significant for him there is he had 32 fastest laps, pole positions, excuse me. And that gives you an indication of the potential speed that he had. But then in his favor, he had possibly the best car in the world at the time, which was the Williams, which was the all-dominating car.
And I suppose, David, so you've revealed your number 10 in terms of Nigel Mansell. We'll come on to number 9, and we're, as the saying goes, we're getting quicker as we go down the positions. So for you, for number 9, who takes this?
Again, it's slightly different because he's possibly one of the quickest drivers out there. But in terms of being the best, he never, again, didn't achieve his full potential. And that was Kimi Raikkonen at number 10. And some people will scratch their head and think, my God, here's a Formula One driver that's been in the business for the best part of 20 years. He made his debut in 2001. He went straight from junior Renner category, which is basically the equivalent of a fast Formula Ford car, straight into Formula One and accommodated himself incredibly well. Probably one of the rawest talents that I've seen out there over the years. Again, an unusual character. And I used to call him the Iceman. And he hadn't got any of the professionalism of any of the drivers ahead on my list. But in terms of raw speed, absolutely right up there.
I suppose we'll just bring you to some of Kimi Raikkonen's stats now. 21 wins, 1,859 career points, and 1 World Championship. I suppose if you look at Kimi Raikkonen, he followed after Fernando Alonso, and we expected a period of dominance for Kimi, but Lewis Hamilton sort of came on the scene, and sort of Kimi, instead of going sort of forwards in terms of achieving his potentially partly stalled, and maybe he allowed Lewis to grab some of the spotlight away from him.
Yeah, I think that could be put down to one word: professionalism. He never really had that work ethic. And to be quite honest, he was lacking in a sense of perspicacity about the sport. He really didn't get the pieces that you need to put together in the same way Schumacher or Hamilton had to be able to get the best guys around him. And you look at the variety of cars that he drove for, it was a real mix. He had Ferrari, he had Sauber, Alfa Romeo, such a number of teams that he's worked with rather than building up a head of steam, so to speak, with the teams around him. One of the other statistics that he was significant for was fastest laps. And I'm always keen to look at fastest laps because it tells you not just the innate speed, but the intelligence that you employ behind the wheel. So he was capable, again, with cars that sometimes weren't the best, to be able to significantly get a fast lap. And it just shows that he could read a race well. I mean, he had it all in the seat of his pants. He was missing elsewhere.
And I suppose, David, so we've heard your number 10 in Nigel Mansell, we've heard your number 9 in Kimi Raikkonen. We'll move up the grids in terms of qualifying for pole position. And who comes in at number 8?
Number 8 is, I never raced against this driver, Nico Rosberg. I raced against his father, who's also world champion. And he's a very smart driver. There's not many that you ever see in any sport that step out at the top. It takes, I think, a very mature competitor to say, I'm never going to walk along this way again. I'm never going to smell the roses again. This is my shot. And he stepped out at the top of his game, and he had an incredibly fraught and difficult season with Lewis Hamilton when he was battling for that championship. And it went down to the wire. And it was a fabulous season of the two of them taking hunks out of each other, left, right, and center. But Nico managed to get it home against arguably one of the quickest drivers and most successful drivers in the world, Lewis Hamilton.
And I suppose we look at Nico Rosberg's stats: 23 wins, 1,595 career points, and one world championship. I suppose you mentioned there about Nico's rivalry with Lewis Hamilton. If Nico came on the scene maybe earlier on, maybe in the 90s, do you think he would have been more successful? Do you think he felt maybe playing second fiddle too much in terms of to Lewis Hamilton, that is probably he might have been better going off projecting elsewhere, being the main guy at a Ferrari or something like that?
Well, the biggest difficulty that any race driver has is not the general scene around him, the engineers, the team managers, the other teams or drivers. It's your teammate. And you're measured constantly with your teammate. And the engineers have every little nuance of that, where you touch the brakes, where you balance the throttle, where you slide the car, where you exit the corner. They can see down in infinitesimal sections where you're better or where you're slower. And I think it can be honestly said that Lewis Hamilton had the edge in terms of speed, but he managed to be a better race driver on that year. And the ball bounced his way. He had a little bit of luck go his way as well. So you are right. If he wanted to continue his career, he could have stepped off into Ferrari. But currently, at the time, there was no other team. And to date, there's no other team that's taken the battle really to McLaren other than, Mercedes than Mercedes. So he probably did the right thing in terms of it can only go downhill from here, because it was going to be very difficult to beat Lewis in a Mercedes.
Okay, so David, we've heard your number 10 in Nigel Mansell. We've heard your number 9 in Kimi Räikkönen. You revealed your number 8 in Nico Rosberg. We bring you on to number 7 and just outside the point scoring system in the old days.
Well, here's another man that cut his teeth in Mondello. Well, he raced in Mondello, was multiple world champion, double world champion, Mika Häkkinen. Now, we've gone from single world champions to double world champions, but that is not the benchmark. That's not the barometer of which I'd be choosing the drivers. It would be a mix of different talents that would see who might be the best. And there's no question that Mika was absolutely stunning on his day. I mean, some of the best racing we've seen was Mika taking the battle to Michael Schumacher, and they were absolutely standout moments. And of course, Mika had a horrendous accident in Adelaide where he was unconscious for several months after an enormous accident. And we really feared for his life, let alone him ever coming back. So what he did challenged everything. And he was one of the few that actually really got into the mental game of the sport. He had an incredible Swedish sporting guru to help him piece together not just his sporting prowess and his endeavours, but his whole life. And it was a really holistic approach. And he set a new trend in that regard. So Mika, no question, was the man that was incredibly difficult to beat on the day.
I suppose, David, Mika Häkkinen, 20 wins, 420 career points, and 2 world championships. I suppose that's the one thing that struck me for a guy so talented as Mika Häkkinen. 20 wins over the 2 years he was victorious. I suppose it struck me that he probably didn't achieve more.
Look for on that. Again, his career wasn't as long as some of the others. He stepped out when he could have continued. Again, he had a terrific number of pole positions. And again, I sort of move over to pole positions looking for that raw speed that he had. And I think he had something like 25 pole positions. And
so
that's
more than wins, yeah.
Yeah, that's very significant.
I suppose, David, we'll bring you down now to number 6. So, and who's just outside the top 5?
Well, just outside the top 5 is another multiple championship winner. And in my book, again, probably in the car, one of the smartest drivers that there ever was, and that's Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso, as I said, double world champion, and he came second several times. That could have been an awful lot more. But his management, I think, made some dreadful errors. He just stepped out of the team at the wrong time when he had a potential winning team there. The years that he spent with Ferrari were such difficult years when that man should have been winning championship after championship. So in some ways, he lost it out of the car. To me, he didn't lose it in the car. Multiple winner and should have been really 4 world championships he should have had.
Fernando Alonso, 32 wins, 1,899 points, and 2 World Championships. And I spoke to Eddie Jordan recently, reminiscing about the Jordan years. And one thing he told me, if he said the driver that frustrated him the most in the last decade had to be Fernando Alonso, because he left scratching his head in terms of how this guy isn't up there in terms of even surpassing the likes of Vettel in terms of achievements. And he's probably he's had his success, but he probably underachieved as well, dare I say it.
Dramatically, as I said, he should have been multiple world champion. I think, you get a chance of, the expression foresight is hindsight to a gobshite. So it's very easy to look back and criticize. But certainly I remember at the time, you're making a big mistake here, Fernando. That's an awful choice of a team to go with. And sometimes he was born out of a little bit of pettiness, a little bit of maybe a lack of confidence in himself. And he really didn't take the battle to Hamilton. He should have owned that team. He should have taken possession of it. And he let it run away from him. And certainly 1 or 2 championships were lost for McLaren as well in that regard. So, yeah, I totally agree with Eddie. That man should have had many, many championships. And I think that was not his skill at the car. It was his personality and how he was led by the management on that. I remember him in Formula 3000 being absolutely stunning as an 18-year-old, winning in Spa, and being out on the course watching him and thinking, this guy is our next world champion. And then they put him in a Minardi, and he beat one of the fastest young kids, Tarso Marquez at the time. And I thought, he's really going to move quickly forward. But what they did is they rested him for a year, let him rest. Well, I think it was Fisichella they let drive. So a few mistakes from the team's point of view as well when he moved to Benetton.
And I suppose, David, now we get on to the serious stuff. It sort of picks up now. And number 5 for you.
Well, again, a difficult area to pick. And again, so many fit in that particular zone. But 4 times world champion Sebastian Vettel, the man who for many years was the youngest Formula One winner at 21, the youngest pole position winner at 21, when he brought home a Minardi stroke Toro Rosso home in a wet and difficult Monza race. Simply outstanding performance for a car that shouldn't have been anywhere near the front. And again, it just flagged him as a man that was going to be something special. And he's had a fabulous career to date.
Sebastian Vettel, 53 wins, 2,985 career points, and 4 world championships. And I suppose Sebastian Vettel, coming from Germany, coming from the country as Michael Schumacher, was there always a sense of that sort of pressure of sort of living in Michael's boots, that he was trying to chase down Michael Schumacher in terms of achieving what Michael did, in terms of getting that own sort of legendary status within his own country, achieving greatness?
Yeah, he was and is a most unusual, I must say, an endearing character. He's probably one of the most likable Formula One drivers on the grid. Always up for a laugh, always a smile, and none of the pressure ever seemed to get to him, and was able to just carry that weight on his shoulders. And believe you me, it is some weight. There's 300 million people want to get into the paddock, want to see you, want to meet you, want to disturb you for every waking minute of your life, and yet he remained gracious and calm and outgoing. So I think he carried the burden very well. He's got a big burden this year with one of our old drivers, or dare I say old new drivers, Charles Leclerc. And I've been tipping him for being a multiple world champion before he ever got into Formula One.
I suppose we're just outside the top 3. No bronze medal for finishing 4th. And who takes this for you, David?
Well, I suppose I could get into trouble for this. Again, I'd probably harken back to some of the older champions, and really people are going to say, look, here's a 6-time world champion. How can you possibly put him in this place? But that would be me, Lewis Hamilton. Lewis has 84 wins to date, a pretty phenomenal program. But, he's been blessed by having the best cars mainly throughout his career. And he's pulled off some incredible, spectacular victories. I remember in 2008 when Felipe Massa, we were commentating for RTE at the time, and Felipe Massa had finished the race, and therefore, as everybody, the other drivers hadn't, Hamilton hadn't finished the lap yet. Therefore, as it stood where Hamilton was on the circuit, Felipe Massa was world champion. And in the next three corners, Hamilton overtook Timo Glock on the last corner of the last lap of the last race to gain one extra point to win the championship. It was stunning stuff. And tremendously, the cameras caught the juxtaposition between the celebrating Massa's family on one side and nobody believing, oh my God, Hamilton has pulled it off by 1 point on the last corner of the last lap. Stunning stuff. And no doubt, look, as quick as they possibly can come, he is right up there. And at this group, this four, in my book, this four at the top are paper thin between the four of them.
And I suppose, David, Lewis Hamilton, 84 wins, 3,431 career points and 6 world championships. And I suppose for placing Hamilton at fourth, is that an indication of the standard of the competition that he has come up against in the last decade? That probably the quality of opponents, if it had been greater, would have mean he would have been higher on the list? Is he sort of guilty of unfortunism in terms of that he hasn't been sort of pushed year in, year out in terms of seeing, can he go to that level of greatness?
Well, to all intents and purposes, he has a level of greatness. 6 times world champion is just outstanding. It's unbelievable. I mean, he's broken all the records, pole positions, fastest laps, the whole shooting gallery. Again, because he's had an enormously successful choice of teams. And, you know, when you consider that this was a kid from, you know, not the wealthiest area by any means, a very standard, poor background, and to come with all the difficulties that he came with. But it was incredible, a fortuitous meeting with the owner of McLaren as a 10-year-old, where he told him he wanted to drive for his team, that Ron Dennis kept in touch with him, or the other way around, Lewis Hamilton kept in touch with him and gave him that break. And my God, didn't he produce the goods. But I mean, the most fascinating battles were between him and Fernando Alonso in the same team. Yeah. And you know what I've seen over the years, Jim, it's the old fox and the young pup. I love the battles when the guy is getting a little bit slower, but he's using all his nuances and track record and his experience and his skill and his connections against this young pup, this charger coming through. And I've seen it time and time again. And here was a classic version of that. But my God, didn't they take hunks out of each other? I suppose the piece we all remember is when parked in the pits in the final dying seconds of qualifying in Hungaroring, Fernando Alonso pitted in and waited, blocking Hamilton to leave to get out to do his qualifying lap, and Alonso getting out and putting the car on pole position and stymieing his teammate. I mean, incredible stuff. You got to remember, Jim, in this business, you know, a driver would kill his mother to gain a tenth of a second. So it's to hold up your teammate in the pits is nothing.
I suppose, David, bronze position now, a place on the podium. You're gonna looking up at second and first, but you've achieved points for your team in terms of the constructors' championship anyway. And who gets third in terms of the world championships, world champions over the last 30 years?
Oh, well, I'm due a good kicking from the motorsport fraternity, but I give you the name I'm going to give. He's certainly, in my book, the fastest driver. I don't think there's any question about that. His ratio of pole positions in terms of races completed, I think, remains the best. But he was a flawed world champion in terms of his makeup. And the driver that had a fabulous success in Mondello, I remember commentating on him when he won a Mondello, and set the world alight there from thence on, and that's Ayrton Senna. So I can see people scratching their heads on that one. You know, I spent a lot of time with Ayrton, and we used to travel to events together. I was driving for Mazda in sports cars. He was racing as a world champion in Formula One. And I remember one trip that we were flying out to Japan. He was driving for Honda, and he came down the plane to speak to me. I was in business class, he was in first class. And I explained to him, Jim, about a race that I saw him lose in a junior category many years before in Brands Hatch when he lost to a fellow called Calvin Fish. The flight from Anchorage to Tokyo is about 14 hours. Well, for 14 hours, he sat beside me and he told me why he lost that race. I tried to open the window at 32,000 feet going 600 miles an hour to get away from him. he was utterly incredible, forensic to the point of madness. And he used to talk about Senna did this and Senna did that. And I would think, well, you're Senna. Now, who is this other guy you're talking about? So it was pretty incredible stuff. But him, as a world champion, it still cut deep the fact that he lost a bloody Formula 4 2000 race around Brands Hatch to a chap that wasn't any significant in his career. But that was some of the intensity that he brought to the sport.
Ayrton Senna, 41 wins, 610 career points and 3 world championships. Sadly, his career cut short. And I suppose, David, in terms of Ayrton Senna, there's no doubt he would have gone on to win more world championships. But you spoke there about his character in terms of looking for those extra motivational factors, those extra sort of things to push him on further. And was that we see many things there today about the Michael Jordans looking for that extra sort of kick. That's the mentality Ayrton Senna that had. He just needed something to stoke the fire in him each time he went out the grid. An extra factor to say, I got to prove this person wrong, I got to prove this wrong, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Is that the mentality of Ayrton Senna?
I think you see it in very few other sports where you can really focus in on the individual. You probably see it in boxing, where a copious amount of self-belief is vital to withstand the pain that you feel when you're being punched and pummeled on the floor, as I think Muhammad Ali alluded to as well. You know, it takes an incredibly brave man to get in there to know that you're going to get hurt. Every lap of every second that you're risking your life, it's an incredibly difficult thing to push yourself to the ragged edge. You know, his record of 6 Monaco wins is pretty incredible. And if there ever was a barometer for raw talent, that's probably the place. And in fact, he was leading the 7th one, one of the race that he would have won now 7 times, except he was just trying to make a bigger gap to himself and Alain Prost. Such as the way he drove himself was I've never seen any of my drivers or drivers that I've worked with to that level. It's always difficult when a driver, and Ayrton would probably, I alluded to this, that God was riding alongside him. And you don't ever want to take on somebody who's prepared to die and think that God's on his side. It's going to hurt to beat this guy.
I suppose, David, that brings us on to the final showdown. There's 2 drivers left. Michael Schumacher is one of them, and Alain Prost is the other one of them. So you might reveal who came second in this final lap shootout between Michael Schumacher and Alain Prost, and who got pipped at the line?
Well, I've had the good pleasure of racing against both of these drivers. Not Michael in Formula 1, Michael in sports cars. He was a young whippersnapper at 19 or 18 or whatever it was. I was coming to the end of my career. And I saw him up close and personal, and he was handling a very large, it's Schumacher is my second, sorry, rather than wander on a little bit, the man who's got 7 world championships to his name. And he just was able to fling these hugely difficult cars around the place. And he hadn't made a name for himself at this time. And he certainly, I thought this guy is a very special talent at this age to be handled these incredibly difficult cars at such a pace. Look, I don't think there's been anyone who's worked harder at the sport than him. I think he brought new levels of fitness, new levels of dedication, and it's reflected in the championships that he's got. He's had the great good opportunity and timing to be able to be in the right teams at the right time. And one of those people that were fundamental to his success was the designer and engineer Ross Brawn. And Ross now is managing director of motorsport in Total. He actually began his career as a mechanic for me when I was racing in Formula 3. So obviously everything I taught him he's put to he's put to good effect. But Schumacher would take second place for me.
Michael Schumacher, 91 wins, the most of any Formula One driver, 1,566 career points and 7 world championships. And I suppose people will look at Michael Schumacher and they'll compare to Alain Prost and say, Michael Schumacher put 5 world championships back to back. Not 2, not 3, 5 world championships back to back. And to achieve that, I know Lewis Hamilton possibly could equal that, and it'd be some monumental feat if Lewis does it, but that is an extraordinary feat in any sport.
Yeah, the wind was in his sails. He really got the team around him. He had Jean Todt, an enormously talented team manager and organizer for Ferrari. As I said, he had Russ Braun. He had Rory Byrne. His family came from Nice, who was the technical director at the time. And he had also, and it's somewhat missed, he had Bridgestone tyres, which were the class of the field at that time. He probably was, an extraordinary time in motorsport. And in some ways, actually, it diminished the sport a little, because it's like Manchester United winning every bloody football match. It can get a little monotonous. And it was difficult from a fan's perspective to really stay close and watch this. From someone like myself, who would be, I'd like to consider, professional in the sport, it was awe-inspiring to see when things went wrong for him in the car, how he would turn out incredible performances when he should not have been winning the races. So he set a standard. And funny enough, I've run his son, Mick Schumacher, in Formula 3 as well, when we won the F3 championship some years ago. So I ran for us in Macau as well. So the DNA is close to home there. But 7 times world champion Michael Schumacher, that's phenomenal.
I suppose, David, before I bring you on to your number one, Alain Prost, just one last thing about Michael Schumacher. Losing that 1997 World Championship to Jacques Villeneuve in dramatic sort of fashion, and the rivalry they had going down the straight. Do you think that spurred Michael on, that hurt him the most? Because he probably felt that that was the championship in his bag, and Jack came and stole it under his nose?
You know, it was an incredible race. It's worth looking back and seeing that sometimes. The season had built to a crescendo, and it was the last race in Jerez in Spain. And there was a point or two between them. But Michael Schumacher had the lead in points, but so he couldn't let Villeneuve get by him. And there was one corner on the circuit that I'd seen that Villeneuve was just that bit quicker than Schumacher. So I was waiting for something like 50 laps for Villeneuve to make the move on him. And inch by inch, Villeneuve got closer and closer and closer. And Villeneuve made the dive down the inside. And there's fabulous in-car footage of Schumacher holding the wheel. And then automatically, you don't make these decisions as conscious decisions. They're instinctive reactions. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, you'll kill your mother for a tenth of a second. And this is one of these moments. He turns the wheel to hit Villeneuve, because if Villeneuve goes off the circuit, if he goes off the circuit, he's world champion. And that's in his system. That's in 99% of the driver's DNA. There's no gentleman out there. It's like going into a boxing ring and saying, look, yeah, you can punch the other guy, but don't hurt him. Sorry, it means nothing. When you put the helmet on, you're going to war. And it's not an excuse for it, but it's a case of trying to understand the psyche. And the exact same thing happened in Adelaide when he was battling with Damon Hill and the two of them tangled. You don't put your head into a lion's jaw.
I suppose, David, we already know your number one. You can repeat that there again. So your number one of the top 10 Formula One World Championships, 1990-2020, is?
Alain Prost.
Alain Prost. And Alain Prost, in terms of elegance, in terms of flamboyancy, he almost like the French Zidane of soccer, in terms of how he sort of maneuvered his car around the grid, the sort of sense of grace to his driving style. And just looking there, Alain Prost, 51 wins, 798 career points, and 4 world championships. And I suppose in terms of a pure skill, was he the most skillful world driver?
Well, I put him down as the best. There's a few other important statistics that are often missed here. First of all, Ayrton Senna ran him off the course in Suzuka, the second last race of the year. That was a lost championship. That would have been 5 world championships. He finished second 4 times in the world championship. And I think one of those was half a point behind the winner, 6 world championship. I raced against him in Formula 3, and I must say, I think he was the silkiest, smoothest driver I'd ever seen. And we were sort of flabbergasted how he could have put himself at the front in a Formula 3 car that was deficient in its chassis, its aerodynamics, and its horsepower. So something told you that this kid was something special. He made his debut in Formula 1 the same time as I did in 1980. Not that mine was a debut worth mentioning. But he had John Watson as a teammate, actually. And it was his all-round 360-degree sense of professionalism, his way of working with the people, his way of organizing things. And he was the first, probably one, they called him the professor because he had that computer-like approach to it. You wouldn't want to meet him anywhere on the grid because he was a threat from any level, anywhere, in any car. In my book, he was the consummate race driver.
I suppose, David, that completes your top 10. And I'm just going to mention now the 3 drivers that missed out. Jenson Button, 15 wins, 1,235 career points, 1 world championship. Jack Villeneuve, 11 wins, 235 career points, 1 world championships. Damon Hill, 22 wins, 360 career points, 1 world championship. And if you to say if someone fell sick in the morning and you to put someone in at number 10 out of those 3, who would it have been? For me, probably the most talented one was probably Villeneuve, but maybe he was the victim of his own circumstances. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I'd probably put in Damon Hill because at this stage, he's such a likable individual. People think that he had the silver spoon or the golden spoon in his mouth. Not a chance. The family lost everything they had when his father died in a tragic airplane accident. He worked near me in London fixing motorbikes. Used to deliver the pizzas to a business that we had around the corner in London. This kid literally came from nowhere and never had the confidence. His book is an extraordinary book. It's probably one of the most revelatory books of any sportsman. It talked about just the lack of confidence and the difficulty he had in facing up to this challenge with a million cameras and thousands of journalists chasing you for every nanosecond of your existence. And I had the great good fortune to be there in Suzuka when he won the World Championship. And he got up out of the car and stood on the monocoque and said, I think if the words were correct, there's nowhere else I'd want to be and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing than where I am in Suzuka. And it was just a golden moment. You know, a man wins the World Championship who's come from really 0 to hero. That's quite something.
And so, David, we'll just count back. So from 10 to 1, your Formula 1 World Championships, 1990 to 2020. So in 10, you have Nigel Mansell. In 9, you have Kimi Räikkönen. In 8, Nico Rosberg. In 7, the Flying Finn Mika Häkkinen. In 6, Fernando Alonso. In 5, Sebastian Vettel. In 4, Lewis Hamilton. In 3, Ayrton Senna. In 2, Michael Schumacher. And number 1, Alain Prost. And I suppose, David, just on a quick note as well, you're involved in a project there in relation to theatre racing in terms of the Macau Grand Prix. Could you enlighten us a bit more about this?
Well, I've been running race cars and teams. Our biggest success was winning the World Cup for Ireland in Team Ireland when we won the A1 in 2008 and 2009. And then with Teddy Yip, Mark Gallagher and John Hines, we took over a team status and we ran at the front in multiple victories in Formula 2 and Formula 3, or GP3 it was called. And then we formed a partnership with Prima. And we won the F2 championship with them, with Charles Leclerc. We won the F3 championship with Lawrence Stroll and Mick Schumacher. And now we've cut down the program to one big event in the world. And it's probably the biggest junior event in the world, which is the Macau Grand Prix for Formula 3 drivers. And something like 60% of the drivers that have won this event have gone on to race in Formula One, and the other 30% have been successful in IndyCar. So the Macau Grand Prix F3 at the end of the year is, for me, the biggest event in the year, and it's where all the team owners will look to see who the next superstar is.
And I suppose, David, just on that note, it's a massive event, and I suppose at the moment, on all the world, the uncertainty at the moment in terms of what the future holds. And I suppose come September, October, will you have more clarification whether hopefully everything going to plan that the event will go ahead this year?
Yes, well, I think the FIA have stated that they'll start events, Formula One events, double headers on weekends starting in July in Austria is the plan, and then going into Silverstone. We'll hear more on Friday, but it won't be a spectator attendance. It'll be a non-spectator event, but the spectators from Formula One are TV.
On that note, David Kennedy, an absolute pleasure this evening talking to you to reveal your top 10 Formula One world champions from 1990 to 2020, stretching over 30 years. A renowned Formula One driver, Irish driver in your time, David, and a renowned Formula One analyst in many years serving our screens in RT Sport and Setanta Sport. And David, take care in this unprecedented times, and hopefully speak to you again sometime soon. Take care, David Kennedy.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.